and the former Deputy President of the Senate. He's also a former mayor of Kingston, Jamaica.
Thank you. Thank you very much, President Navid. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I wanted to just thank the government and parliament of Pakistan, President Navid and Secretary General Monica, and the members and staff of both the Parliament and PGA who have worked tirelessly to make all of this seem so seamless. In the back of my mind, as I prepare to make my presentation, are some words that keep ringing that some of you might know as words from His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie I, but also made famous by Bob Marley. Until the philosophy that holds one race superior and another inferior is finally and permanently abandoned, there will be war, rumors of war. I have this discussion today. Rule of law, deter international crimes and armed conflicts, and contribute to peace and stability in Jamaica as well as the region. The precondition for the ratification of the statute in Jamaica is the adoption of implementing legislation by the Parliament. Without this implementing legislation enacted by Parliament, the Jamaican executive cannot ratify the Rome Statute. Once the legislation is enacted, the ratification can be done by an executive decision by adoption of the government. So far, our domestic legislation does not include any crimes or general principles under the Rome Statute. As such, to move forward, Jamaica first needs to adopt implementing legislation. Our former Minister of Justice and present opposition leader, Mark Golding, initiated the process in 2015 and had fast-tracked the legislation to facilitate its passage. Unfortunately, with elections in 2016 and a change of government and shifting legislative priorities, the process was stalled. The new Minister of Foreign Affairs, Kamina Johnson-Smith, reaffirmed Jamaica's commitment to ratify in 2017. However, despite the questions in Parliament and the questions to the Attorney General and those on the order paper, we have heard nothing. The Russia-Ukraine conflict and its impact on Jamaican students studying in Ukraine at the time reminded all of us of the importance of the ICC. It also showed the importance of Jamaica being able to stand in solidarity with victims of international crimes while promoting justice, human rights, and development. So what's the next step? The next steps would be to revive and revise the draft legislation, advance the legislative process, and adopt implementing legislation. That technical assistance is available from state parties and international organizations, including the PGA, to aid in this process. The scope of implementing legislation needed to be adopted at this point should include definitions of the 4 crimes aligned with the Rome Statute, the core principles under international criminal law, also codified in the Rome Statute, and provisions on cooperation. At this moment, the most effective course of action for us is to work with the Attorney General on the adoption of implementing legislation. To do that, we would need to revive the existing implementing legislation and send it to Parliament for adoption. This seems unlikely to be led by the current government, with elections due by September next year, and having not done so for the last 7 years or more. I do believe, however, that there is an opportunity still to move a private member's motion asking for the government to consider the draft regulations and, with assistance, move to close the circle by passing local implementing legislation. This I intend to do as a clear message because joining the ICC, Jamaica will strengthen its international profile, promote justice, and contribute to global peace and security. I wanted to end by just mentioning 2 lessons that I think we have learned from the process. One is to start advocacy early in the term. Once you allow the term to progress and the priorities shift, sometimes it becomes harder to get that work done. And the other is persistence. And I say persistence because in our parliament, it's 49 to 14. That huge majority sometimes seems very oppressive in parliament. And it is only by being courageous and persistent that we are able to get anything done. But the road is not at an end. There is still work that we can do, and my commitment is to continue working to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela. And now we go on to Mozambique. And another colleague of mine on the board of PGA, Antonio Nikisa. Please, over to you.
Assalamu alaikum. Good morning. Bonjour. Bom dia. Bom dia is Portuguese. Well, as was well said, ratifying the Rome Statute and its amendments is so relevant to member states to achieve the rule of law, universal justice, and avoid impunity and human rights violations. There is indeed a need to ensure that state parties are fully in compliance and accountability to avoid and prevent and even further resolve brutal crimes against human rights and impunity. So I would like to join my voice as well and commend all the efforts done by PGA through this global network, the largest individual network of parliamentarians at really ensuring that the Rome Statute and its expansion of the international criminal law framework best practice worldwide is becoming a reality. We parliamentarians across the globe have a huge responsibility to ensure that member states join the Rome Statute and become, all of us member states, accountable. In the case of Mozambique, Mozambique signed the Rome Statute in December 2000, but has not yet ratified. The ratification is under process and any interministerial review, and has been raised internally issues related to compatibility with the Mozambican constitution, in particularly in issues related to immunities. But Mozambique rejected the proposal that was framed for member countries in the African Union to withdraw in mass from the ICC. There are some potential challenges and obstacles related to ensure the effectiveness of ICC and the Rome Statute. Some of them are related to what have been raised in this gathering with misconceptions on how the ICC works in the correlations of powers between the West and the South. So there is a need to align and domestify international legislations at the national levels. I also consider that there's a need of permanent training and capacity building of parliamentarians to ensure that they are in a better position to advocate and participate actively in the adoption of the Rome Statute in their respective countries. We have in our parliaments across the globe a huge number of turnouts. So every elections, we have new MPs coming in. So then you need to again and again support with and equip them with the better tools and information about ICC and Rome Statute so that they can become advocates. It's a matter of collective responsibility defending human rights, justice, what entails the full concept of Rome Statute and ICC. So in the case of Mozambique, which has now challenges related to terrorism in the northern part of the country due to the huge boom of oil and gas in a province called Cabo Delgado. There are so many concerns related to human rights. So this also links with the lack of prioritization. More pressing issues like the challenge in the oil and gas industry and economic challenges with the international security concerns. Also concerns that it might compromise with the national sovereignty in the ICC, where the ICC can intervene in the states in not genuine investigative prosecution process with the crimes. But we do understand that the ratification could be one of the best way to deter the escalation of conflicts and secure that human rights are guaranteed and also justice. I think there has been also a bilateral non-surrender agreement between Mozambique and the United States in June 2003. That agreement put some pressure on Mozambique on a critical deterrent of the ratification process. And I also understand that this issue related to who is ruling the ICC as a global perception in the correlations of power between the West and the South is something which has to be taken into consideration on how we move the process in a fair basis so that people can understand that this is an institution that really wants to ensure that peace prevail, justice prevail, human rights are guaranteed for everyone, and everyone can enjoy in a peaceful environment. So this is what I should and I could share at this point of time. And once again, commend on the efforts which has been done across the globe by all the MPs around in this meeting, and particularly by PGA leadership. Thank you so much. Muito obrigado.
Thank you, Mr. Sir. And next we come to Pakistan, and Senator Sherry Rahman will address the universality of ICC.
Thank you, Honorable Mr. Kamar, distinguished parliamentarians, guests from civil society, other delegates. I think this is an incredible opportunity to talk about issues that are on our minds, frankly, collectively, individually, and also at a fast pace of changing global events, are especially global turbulence is redefining the kind of multilateralism we sought from the world. And the ICC is an instrument, or seeks to be an instrument of multilateralism. But to my mind, and from experiences discussed here and learnings made from such encounters, I think 3-4 things come to mind. One is that we have obviously the absence of a collective consensus, and it's a valuable opportunity for parliamentarians to build that consensus, because what parliaments do, many times governments cannot do. They also are able to create constituencies for change, for peace, rights, and the application of justice, which is then seen as imbued with hope and less double standard. Now, double standards, secondly, remains a key issue. It can be called complementarity. It can take the shape of different manifestations in this legal ambit and framework of application of international laws and crimes being detected. And that has become a bone of contention for something that we would think needs global attention, needs multilateral resources, and a singular amount of heft. But clearly, we are not speaking or talking or meeting in a political or international vacuum. The international political situation is that geopolitics and power trumps all. Again, apologies for using those words, but they do trump all. And that is very much the reality unfolding not just in Pakistan's neighborhood in South Asia, but also, as you can see, a spiraling conflict that threatens to undermine and disrupt global peace, certainly regional peace in the Middle East. Now, it's not a humanitarian crisis that's come of its own, and that's linked to this. Linked to all of this is the conversation on genocide, what constitutes genocide, its definitions, how we have gotten where we are, where after the Second World War we thought, well, that's all over. But clearly it's not. And there has been great hesitation in among Security Council members, which have weight in this whole framework, to define and redefine what is called human rights, what is called democratic intervention, what is not. So countries naturally are now rethinking all their universalist positions, all of what we understood under the Charter of the UN and multilateralism is frankly all open again. Why? Because, and that's the point that worries me, is we speak of a rules-based international order. I'm sorry, there isn't one right now. There may be a rules-based international order for those holding power. For others, there is disorder. And I'm not reading from this speech or contemplating points that have been brought up. I think there is time not just to wake up the room, it is after, after lunch for us, but also to kind of shake up what our universalist concepts are. Now, I understand that my country's position is very clear. We live in a neighborhood where uh, several wars have been fought between two nuclear armed neighbors. One of our right in our disputed territory, one of our areas is hugely disputed. It is at the UN as the oldest, on the docket as the oldest dispute, the dispute over Kashmir, Azad Jammu and Kashmir. And while India illegally occupies one area and keeps changing the terms of its occupation with both genocidal and other intent, and demographic change in that area. We see the same thing happening in Palestine. We see settler colonialism projects expand slowly. In one day, Israel, with impunity, this is why I keep bringing up this word, bombs 4 countries and gets away with calling it self-defense. So that's bizarre. And obviously, an international court of justice in the kind of world we seek would have reach and power and capacity to prosecute these kind of crimes. In Kashmir and as an occupied Kashmir, you have mass graves for 100,000 people. You have women raped routinely as part of their of the harassment of a community, the exclusion of Muslims particularly. In those areas, and indigenous Kashmiris who are inherently more inclined to be with Pakistan. I cannot speak for them. I'm just speaking about what I see on the ground. And as a parliamentarian, I feel I have a right to. So I'm not speaking in a political bubble or vacuum. I insist that we address our search for human rights, fundamental freedoms, justice, and particularly the prosecution of war crimes outside that vacuum. We are not, and I appreciate that PGA allows us to do that as a forum. It allows us to speak our minds and seek collective solutions to what we think are clear and present dangers to not just regional stability, but serious dangers to global peace. Now, all you need to do is open your internet, and even if you put away the alarmist, assessments, there is no longer any clarity of where the map of, say, Lebanon will move. I mean, I don't want to say this, but clearly Israel feels it can move into one country and then into another and have completely different set of rights enabled for it. And then Israel also feels that it can fight, it has been fighting proxy wars, it can fight open wars in one day. Now it has extended itself to more than, as I said, 4 countries. But settler colonial projects in both occupied Kashmir, in my neighborhood, do make me wonder what is, how multilateral order is being tested. Where are the rules? Rules are no longer legitimate if they don't apply, just as basic law, if they don't apply uniformly. So if 3 to 4 powers in this world are above that law, then as one of my colleagues, maybe not with the same intention as me, asked here, are we different races? And my adjunct to that would be then what happens to the laws that we sign up to when there are clearly children of more than one God to be adjudicated? It's a very, very stark and important question for convenings such as this. I'm not here to just finger point at certain countries. That is not the intention. The intention is to seek tangible, clear, and legal solutions to what we all see with rising anger in our hearts and minds about what is going on in the world. I said earlier this morning, this is not the world we talked about or dreamed of. This is not, and can then the Rome Statute, this is not the peace we were talking about. This is not peace. This is a lot of hot wars while we talk about peace. So, and ceasefires and all of the above. So how does the Rome Statute come in? It was, I think, defined by an underlying, the same dream I speak about, that justice can be internationalized, that it can be universally applied, and it can criminalize genocide, right? That's the basis here of what we're talking about. I'm going to cut all the jargon out, and this is what we are talking about. So while we do that, tell me how we can spend the next 1.5 days left now in figuring out how countries that are shy of accepting intrusions into their sovereignty, those who have already seen intrusions into their sovereignty, go forward with building commonality. How do I make a case to my parliament? I want to make a case. All my life we have fought, my party has fought, we're human rights defenders. But tell me, how do I make a case to my parliament, not my government? That's the next step. Parliaments need critical mass to effect change. And how do I get that critical mass when my parliamentarians from both houses ask the questions that I have alluded to? Then how will this apply to us? Will it give international powers or multilateralism the power to intrude into our country while allowing impunity to others, right? So that blocks your ratification. That blocks the next step, which also tells me that with the same intensity, I can speak for my entire parliament. They will want justice. They will want international justice, particularly for genocide, and not just in Kashmir and occupied Kashmir or Palestine. I speak, I think, for the opposition too. I think everyone would speak with one collective voice on that. So how do we square that? That is what we are grappling with. Countries bringing their particular problems here are important, their challenges, their hesitations about coming on board. But when human rights defenders ask these questions, we don't have the answers. We don't have cogent answers on how this particular covenant can be used against us. We're not genocidal, obviously. My colleagues here will say, but you're not genocidal. I may not be. Of course not. But in prosecuting crimes, even in Africa, we have seen selective accountability applied. We've seen it. I work in the climate space. I see daily selective, very egregiously selective climate injustice. And then I get talked at by members of the global north, right? So talked down at what we must do, while they remain, frankly, if you're going to be colonizing this conversation, then that's what it is. I'm not here to make anyone uncomfortable, but I want to raise questions and also be the devil's advocate, because without doing that, we will not break the critical mass needed to go forward to remove impunity from genocidal crimes, war crimes, which, as we saw an era where that was possible. So now that we've created a Rome Statute and an ICC, people without power look to it with hope for another future. But before we become Pollyannas, I'm not going to be a Pollyanna. Pollyanna means someone who's got bright eyes and is not looking at what may happen. Women always know and seek another answer because laws don't always apply to us, either at home or abroad or in the workplace. They apply very selectively. I will not try to compel my parliament to do something we have not squared a circle over. So I want to use this space, but I also want to testify to the fact that Pakistan as a whole, not just its parliamentarians, would be supportive of any instrument of universal justice or any instrument that seeks to internationalize crimes against humanity, because those are the bases we are talking about. We want to do that. Find us a way while we are here together to answer those questions, to get past those barriers, and also find a way to broaden this conversation in more meaningful ways. For those, my colleague is here telling me he's making restless noises. For those of us, yes, thank you, I just conclude. For those of us who want to broaden the conversation, what does that mean? For any treaty, for any ratification, for any universal instrument to be effective and have legitimacy and therefore power, the power does not come from militaries, it comes from democracies and from people. And for that to happen, this conversation has to find its way into the heart and minds of the states that are holding back for whatever reason. Some may have good reason, some may have a worm in their hearts. I can't speak for that. Their establishments, but their parliamentarians won't. So this is where we all come in, and I want to thank you for hosting this important convening, and hope that we can take this conversation further. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sherry. And the final speaker that we have is joining us online. It's Honorable Marwa Bashir from Somalia, who will be speaking virtually.
Greetings.
Sorry.
That is a wrong name. My name is Dr. Abdullahi Ashabib. I'm a member of the Foreign Committee of the Parliament for the Republic of Somalia, and I'm honored to participate this noble discussion about Rome Statute and its ratification. And I'm so grateful to Monica Adam for being her support towards me during my last year when I was trying to do the writing in the parliament and try to introduce new ideas that never existed in the Somalian parliament, which is a rule of law, which is a new phenomenon in my country. Everybody believes that if you are a member of parliament, or you are a minister, or the president or the prime minister, or the speaker of the parliament, whatever position you have, you are above the law. And nothing you do is going to be accountable to the people who elected you. With that background and growing up a family where my father was a high position in the government and stood up with the military government by refusing to break the rule of law, with that background and being raised that way, that values I inherited from my parents has guided me since the last 2 years and a half. I have done a lot of investigation with all the agencies of the government to do my thorough oversight, which has never been done. I documented more than 300 reports of corruption, which is not only corruption, it's a rampant corruption and violating both international laws and also national laws with impunity, and international community are looking the other way around. And I was fortunate enough to bring motion to ratify Rome Statute on 9th of this year. But unfortunately, the Speaker of the House in conjunction with the president of my country, has rolled my motion. And after a month of asking them to give me in writing why Rome Statute has not been, why my motion has not been accepted, which went through all the parliamentarian procedures, finally I got a letter back, and I have already shared with ICC, which violates every procedure of the parliament and the constitution. But since we don't have a constitutional court, I have no place to go. And the speaker, if he makes a decision whether to go yes or no with any motion. So far, a lot of members of parliament have tried to bring a motion to account for the government that runs the country today, but all of them have been denied, and we don't have any other path. With that, and also our neighboring country, Ethiopia, annexing our country with impunity and taking our land and violating our sovereignty and internal affairs. The only method that I see that we can stop the aggression of Ethiopian Prime Minister was to join and ratify Rome Statute. Article 7.2 will have been applicable to the action taken by the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. But the problem is this: ICC has an opportunity to introduce these laws into Africa, and especially in Horn of Africa. But the problem is that it is a perception that ICC is created to only prosecute African leaders and African countries. And that perception is very difficult to overcome. When I discuss with members of my parliament and explain to them the importance of ICC and why it will be very good for our country, so we can introduce back the rule of law, and there will be accountability for any aggression against anybody's human rights being violated, they don't understand. And ICC is sitting their butt in the Netherlands and just expecting everybody come and do it without introducing the importance of why we have to join ICC and not working with the parliamentarians in Africa especially, who feel they are not represented in ICC is only for the powerful countries. It is their obligation to create an invoice or special ambassadors that will go to Africa and get to know the members of parliaments and explain the importance of this. I have been trying to reach out to members of my parliament a year ago, and today their attitude towards ICC and Rome Statute ratification is totally different. And I was so grateful to PGA helping me for the first time to send 3 members of parliament to get trained in Den Haag and teach them what Rome Statute is all about and what also rule of law means in Somalia. In members of parliament in Somalia, we have 275 and we have 54 senators. I tell you that 90% of the members of parliament and senators have no experience to be a parliamentarian. Some of them don't even have the background to be understanding what we're talking about. So they never prepare in their life legislation. So how do you expect them to write a legislation that will address and make sure that Somali constitution meets the requirements for Rome Statute? I have been asking international donors to change their attitudes towards Somalia, and instead of funding the rule of law to the justice system in Somalia, the courts which have been violating the rule of law, to divert that funds and use that funds to train the members of parliament inside the country at the federal level, at the state level, and the regional level. But everybody is not listening because there is a method of donating money to the wrong people. So what do we need to do? From my experience is that we need to have a relationship with ICC, having interaction with the members of parliament, and with that training and interaction with it will help us to rectify. Right now, we have 180 members of parliament in Somalia ready to rectify the Rome Statute. But the president and the speaker of the House have a problem with it. And the reason behind is that their misconception about ICC or Rome Statute is that everybody has a skeleton in their closet, because during the Civil War, a lot of people commit crimes against humanity. So they think by bringing ICC and Rome Statute into Somalia will bring them to the ICC court. When I explain to them is that the day we rectify by vote in the parliament, that is the day we can start implementation. Whatever happened before happened, but we can move forward with a new life at the day we rectify. So failure of ICC not selling their product to my country and to other African countries, and the perception is that the powerful countries are above the law, and it's only the poor one and have to be meet with this type of persecution. When they single out corruption on African leaders, while the other Asian countries or South American countries or European countries are caught corruption, nobody talks about, nobody prosecutes about. So this double standard that exists in the real world has to change. And ICC can play a very vital role to change that mindset in Africa and show them that the law is on their side. And this is the best way forward. Example, in Somalia, we don't have a constitutional court. So where do I go? So this will help us to build our courts, because one of the benefits of joining ICC is that they will help to build the justice system in your country. Funding coming in, training judges to understand about the basic rules of law at the state level, at the federal level, and the regional level. So what I'm asking ICC is that instead of putting and shuffling the things on our throat, come and sit with us, understand the culture in that countries, because cultural respect for countries that you're trying to implement is a very important role. Because if the community accepts that what ICC is offering is good for their own cultural value, then it is easier to convince the members of the parliament. I can assure you, from what I know right now, I can guarantee if we get a support, both training and resources for the members of parliament in Somalia, by mid next year, we will pass and ratify the Rome Statute. And with that experience, I'm asking to send the resources to the right direction. And thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to participate in this novel conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we open the floor for a very brief session. Unfortunately, we have been going over our time, but we can take 3 or 4 questions. So please. Yes, Esther.
Hello, I'm going to try to speak English since not too many will understand Spanish. My name is Esther Cuesta from Ecuador, South America. Long trip to be here. Thank you, Navid, for welcoming us. I very much agree with our colleague Sherry Rehman has said regarding the urgency to act as members of parliament. And I cannot avoid remembering what is going on as we speak in Gaza. Gaza is the first time we have a war that is live on social network, that we're seeing it as children are being killed, as women have been killed, as children are mutilated. So my question is also, so what are the judges waiting for, for these irreparable damages that are happening as we speak in Gaza? Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said it, the Security Council is an unfair, outdated mechanism of the United Nations systems. So Ecuador, at some point, we proposed to reform the Security Council. As long as there is a Security Council, all countries, all states, members of the UN, we're not all equal. Are we waiting a third world war to change that? You know? The other thing I want to ask my colleague Antonio from Mozambique is if he can tell us a little more the process of ratification. You mentioned, Antonio, that there are some issues about the constitutionality of the Rome Statute in the Mozambique Constitution, and it has to do with immunity. My question is, does that have to do with immunity of heads of state and high officials? And if there is a Supreme Court or the equivalent of it that has already emitted a verdict that establishes that it's unconstitutional, and if that is posing the question of whether you can ratify it or not in Parliament, I'd like to know more about that if you can share with us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any further questions? Can we get some new ones and then we go come back? Am I missing somebody? Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, our panelists. My question goes to Mozambique. Firstly, my name is Mary Navicha, member of Parliament from Malawi. Let me start with apologies. My question will be more like provoking, but allow me to ask it. We have some big countries like UK, Russia, and other countries who are not member states, and they are not signed. They are not signed the Rome statutes. What measures can the PGA put in place to ensure that those countries comply to what other countries are doing? I'm asking this question because we've seen these countries committing too many crimes, and many countries are suffering because of these countries who are not members who are members that are not signed Rome Statute. So are there any plans as PGA to put in place, like, are we engaging with those countries, or are we giving them pressure for them to sign? What should be done for them to be part of us? I thank you.
MP from Nepal.
Thank you very much. Very good discussion. Congratulations to PGA. So I'm Eknath Dhakal. I am a member of Parliament from the House of Representatives of the Federal Parliament of Nepal. So I'd like to ask a question to our MP from Ukraine. So is there any hope to end war in Ukraine in the near future? Just one question, very simple question. Thank you very much.
Can I add my question also?
Thank you.
Seher Kamra, member National Assembly from same Pakistan People's Party. I would like to second what has been mentioned now, that we are watching the ongoing live war. We are watching live genocide. So what was the reply to my question? I would go further to that what can be done to make the International Criminal Code effective? You know, if the effectiveness is very important, and how can the United Nations Security Council be reformed so that the justice will be assured?
Thank you. Akhil, you still want to ask a question? No. Okay, fine. I think I'll allow the panelists to answer the questions or issues that have been raised, but it's voluntary, so whoever wants to go ahead. Angela.
I probably want to answer the last question first, which is what is the ICC going to do in terms of bringing these superpowers who are not a part of the ICC here? I'll be honest, I don't have the answer to that. But what I will say is, in the case of Jamaica, it took great pressure from the opposition party to get our government to even mention, acknowledge, much less condemn any of what was happening. Why am I starting there? I'm starting there because it's going to take the courage of all of us to stand up and to speak out. I am not sure how much longer we're going to ask, how do we get these superpowers who believe that they are bigger than everyone else anyway to come to the table? Yeah? Except that by collective effort and pressure, we show that we will not yield. I don't know any other way. For many of what we have won, we have fought and won, we have done it at great sacrifice. Yes? We have done it being injured, being pressured, being denied so many things that were all right. I don't think that we are any less courageous than our forefathers. I believe that we are going to have to begin to tap into that courage that we have instead of expecting others to do it for us. You know, it might sound harsh, but I just want to say that.
Thank you. Senator Sherry Rahman, you want to respond?
Yes, very quickly, a bunch of questions, but I can't speak to all of them. But I do want to speak to two of them. One asked about when will the war in Ukraine end. That's not for me to answer because there's a person sitting here empowered to answer. But I do want to say one thing. When we condemn occupation of any country, which Pakistan does, then we've got to condemn forced occupation of other countries as well. Right now, you see 2-3 wars going on. One condemns one kind of occupation, but not the other. So it is a travesty of justice in any multilateral context. And I think, obviously, we all want wars to end. But the quick answer to when will wars end, when will the UN security system come down to a place where it can actually be effective and adjudicate the growing conflict and literally chaos in the world. Now, somebody spoke of a third world war. It's not out of any realm of possibility given what's going on. Conflicts can spiral overnight, and the threat of nuclear war. So, I mean, with great power comes surely great responsibility. And that is one of the things we must remind great powers to look at. And our job is to speak truth to that power, right? And continue to do that, continue to amplify the voice, not let only one kind of narrative dominate, which is part of seeking any normalized justice system. Around it, there is a story. And if stories are contained behind iron curtains, whether it's in Israel or in occupied Kashmir, whether it's in Palestine, occupied Kashmir, then it is part of the problem. So speaking truth to that power is happening right now. It is not happening unproductively. I think that when we seek conflict or when we become combative, we lose the opportunity to walk into a round table, a virtual or other round table, where peace can actually be negotiated or navigated. Sometimes it needs to be navigated before it's negotiated, and that would imply ceasefires and various parties coming to the table. That is still something that the UN does, but the question then still rises: what happens about what happens when some states talk about the right to preemption, that they can preemptively strike one country looking for weapons of mass destruction, ostensibly, and then walk away after it is balkanized, right? So I think that we need to continue this conversation with their parliaments as you see, lastly, I'm saying, as you can see all over the world, particularly the European nations and the West that we are speaking to here, speaking about, those who hold power, their people, not necessarily their governments, but their people are speaking out in large numbers to in particularly in joining voice with us against genocide, against impunity, and perhaps that page can turn when we start doing more of what we're doing, speaking to people's representatives who then speak to their people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cliff.
The peace formula of President of Ukraine, Zelensky, continues to be the only realistic and comprehensive plan to stop the war of Russia against Ukraine, to restore Ukraine's territorial integrity, and to bring peace to international community. The first peace summit took place mid-June this year in Switzerland, and more than 100 leaders of countries and international organizations participate in that, and also signed communique, the resolution of this summit. This communique is open to the signature to all other countries who did not participate, and actually everyone here in this hall who represent the countries who were not present in Switzerland for the first peace summit, inaugural peace summit, everyone can contribute to while convincing the governments, the leaders of your respective countries to join with the signature of this communique and to participate in the second summit that will take place in the end of this year. Actually, the peace formula of Volodymyr Zelensky has 10 points, including energy security, food security, kidnapping of Ukrainian kids, because we have more than 19,000 of Ukrainian kids deported to Russia Federation, and we don't know how Russia Federation deals, like how they treat these kids, because their Russian propaganda calls Ukrainians Nazis, so we don't know if these kids, they have human treatment or as if they're Nazi kids. Territorial integrity is one of the 10 points of this peaceful plan, and it also deals with the reform of the UN Security Council. We think that Russia cannot be continued to be the member of UN Security Council because it violates any kind of international law. International justice cannot, prevail while the aggressor blocks any kind of decisions of the UN Security Council. The peace efforts continue these days at the levels of foreign advisors and ministers, different formats of implementation of the peace formula of Volodymyr Zelensky. And actually the idea is that 100 plus leaders of the world community who signed the communique and will sign the final document will present to the leadership of Russia the final version how the peace should look like. And the aggressor has to accept the rules and the vision of the majority of democratic community who thinks that the restoration of peace should be of this kind. Also, President Zelensky presented his idea on just for peace. It was presented already in the US, in the White House and Congress, last week in Brussels, in Ukrainian parliament. So basically this plan is just how to implement the peace formula. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonia. Final response before we all rush for lunch.
Thank you. I think my answers will be addressed to Ecuador, my sister from Ecuador, and Malawi. Well, there is this general common sense that really the superpowers, the states you mentioned, are not accountable. They are not seen as part of the process when it comes to responsibility and accountability in the ICC, and it generates the understanding that the ICC framework and the Rome Statute is driven to rule the weaker states. That's why I raised the issue of superpowers and the West and the South. So this one has to be resolved as well to ensure the integrity of the Rome Statute and the ICC, so that it will not generate or bring this perception of the double power, that when it is the West in aggression and violation of human rights, they are not taken into accountability by ICC, but when it's the South, I mean, the weaker states, they are always sued, and that perception is theirs, that the ICC is meant to prosecute the poor states. So that's why I said even in the African Union, there was this understanding that all the states should withdraw from the Rome Statute, but Mozambique in the case did not follow that submission, because we do understand that the vision, mission, and objectives of ICC and the Rome Statute are really what the world should stand for when it comes to justice, avoiding impunity, avoiding human rights violation and other atrocities. But there is a lot to be done to ensure that everyone can come on board, should lead by example. In the case of Mozambique, we have a constitutional system of separation of power. So then the executive is the one who is entitled to sign the agreement, and then it has to be approved by Parliament. So that's why I explained that there's been ongoing discussions on how to ensure that the framework that does not match or violate what is in our constitutions. And this discussion, this engagement has been moved forward, and I think what is now being analyzed is on how we are going to domestify to ensure that the legislations which has to be adopted must also be implemented in our local legislation. So this is a process, and I think once it is done, once the process is firmly secured, that the instruments which comes from international laws matches with the local, particularly with the Constitution, we are going to be in a position to adopt or ratify the framework and the Rome Statute. So in a nutshell, that should be what I could say. As a process, we have to comply with what we have, which is mandatory because we have a system of separations of power. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that brings us to the close of this session. We'll break for lunch, which is being served at the same place where we had the inaugural session. And after that, we gather here at 2:15. No. 2:35. So we have a little bit more time. So come back, please. Have some strong cups of coffee. I can see a lot of people are feeling the jet lag. So waiting to welcome you back. Thank you.